Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm going to read from the Sublime Attitudes by Ajahn Jeff. I had the fortune to spend a little bit of time with him earlier this year, and I found him to be quite filled with the Sublime Attitudes. He was easy to be around. I know sometimes you listen to him giving a talk, he can seem quite stern, but I found him really easy to talk to, really easy to be around. So when I got back, I checked out this book, and I found it to be really helpful for me in cultivating these attitudes. Just to say, I was reading this before. I heard Tanu Basi's reading yesterday. They're quite different perspectives on the brahmaviharas. So some of you might prefer Ajahn Sona's flowery poetic language and connect with that, and that's wonderful. Use that. Ajahn Jeff's approach might be a little more technical, but I connect with that and found it useful. So if you like Ajahn Sona, read Bloom. It's excellent. I've read that. But if you like a different approach to the Sublime Attitudes, I also encourage you to maybe check this out. Introduction. Head and heart together. The Sublime Attitudes, brahmaviharas, are the Buddha's primary heart teachings, the ones that connect most directly with our desire for true happiness. They're the qualities of heart that motivated the Buddha to find awakening and then to teach the path of awakening to others. At the same time, they function as part of the path itself. This means that the wisdom of the Buddha's teachings, its, quote, head aspect, has to be understood in terms of these heart qualities. At the same time, though, these heart qualities have to be understood in terms of the head teachings on how cause and effect in our actions can bring about genuine happiness. Only when head and heart are brought together in this way can the path yield its full results. The term brahmavihara literally means dwelling place, vihara, of Brahmas. Brahmas are beings who live in the higher heavens, dwelling in an attitude of unlimited goodwill, unlimited compassion, unlimited empathetic joy, and unlimited equanimity. These attitudes are unlimited, both in the sense that they extend to all beings, and in the sense that they can be applied to all situations where they are appropriate. For example, you can extend empathetic joy to all who are happy, regardless of whether you like them. Similarly, you can feel compassion for all who are suffering, regardless of what they did to bring on that suffering. These unlimited attitudes can be developed, and for the path to thrive, they have to be developed from the more limited versions of these emotions that we normally experience in the human heart. Of these four attitudes, goodwill, metta, is the most fundamental. It's a wish for true happiness, both for yourself and for others. Because the highest level of true happiness comes from within, your true happiness need not conflict with that of anyone else. Thus, goodwill can be extended to all beings without contradiction or hypocrisy. The next two attitudes are essentially applications of goodwill. Compassion, karuna, is what grows out of goodwill when you see suffering. You want the suffering to stop. Empathetic joy, mudita, is what grows out of goodwill when you see happiness. You want that happiness to continue. Equanimity, upekkha, is a different attitude, in that it acts as an aid to and a check on the other three. When you encounter suffering that you can't stop, no matter how hard you try, you need equanimity to avoid creating additional suffering and to channel your energies to areas where you can be of help. You also need equanimity to strengthen your endurance when meeting with difficulties or needing to make sacrifices in the course of striving for greater happiness. In this way, equanimity isn't cold-hearted or indifferent. It simply makes your goodwill more focused and effective by opening your heart to the lessons of your head. Which means, of course, that your head has to be giving the right lessons. This is where it's important to understand the brahmaviharas within the context of Buddhist practice. In particular, the Buddhist teachings on what happiness is and how it can best be attained. And yet this is an aspect of brahmavihara practice that is often lacking in the West, creating many misunderstandings about what the various brahmaviharas mean, how they are practiced, and the effect they are supposed to have. The purpose of this study guide is to clear up some of these misunderstandings. First, by looking at the place of the brahmaviharas in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path, the teaching that provides the overall context for all Buddhist practice, and in particular, the path factor of right view, both on the mundane and transcendent levels. Then, having established this context, it discusses 7 common misunderstandings about brahmavihara practice, showing both how these misunderstandings can create obstacles to effective Buddhist practice, and how they can be corrected with reference to right view. This is then followed by a set of readings that provide further correctives to the misunderstandings, at the same time illuminating additional points so that brahmavihara practice can be truly effective in leading to a happiness that's lasting and true. In the context of right view. In the Buddha's Eightfold Path to Awakening, the brahmaviharas can act as part of 2 of the 8 factors, the second factor, right resolve, and the 8th, right concentration. Right resolve is defined as the resolve for renouncing sensuality, the resolve for non-ill will, and the resolve for non-cruelty. The resolve to act on goodwill is equivalent to the second of these resolves, the resolve to act on compassion to the third. As part of right resolve, goodwill and compassion provide the motivation to act on the insights of right view, which is the first factor, into the nature of action and its power to bring about the end of suffering. In other words, goodwill and compassion take these insights and resolve to use them to direct your thoughts, words, and deeds to bring about the end of suffering and to attain true happiness. As part of right concentration, all 4 brahmaviharas can function as objects of jhana, the strong levels of concentration that strengthen the mind's ability to make the sublime attitudes truly unlimited. The concentration based on these attitudes can also provide the mind with the steadiness and inner strength it needs for discernment to break through to total release. Because the brahmaviharas function both toward the beginning and again toward the end of the path, they have an interactive relationship with all the other path factors. On the one hand, they provide the motivation to practice right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness, both for one's own good and for the good of others. On the other hand, the development of concentration based on the brahmaviharas requires, as a prerequisite, that you work on making your thoughts, words, and deeds harmless, for otherwise your concentration will be undermined by hypocrisy. Actually, all the factors of the path have an interactive relationship, interpenetrating and strengthening one another along the way. This means that the brahmaviharas, as elements in right resolve and right concentration, also strengthen right view, the first factor of the path, just as right view gives them guidance. To begin with, right view is not simply a collection of facts about the world. Instead, it focuses attention on a single problem, which is an issue of goodwill and compassion: how to understand causality in a way that helps put an end to suffering. In this way, the brahmaviharas provide direction for the use of discernment on the path. At the same time, the brahmaviharas, in the context of the path, take their guidance from right view so that they don't flounder around in wishful thinking or ineffectual resolves. Instead, grounded in a clear understanding of cause and effect, They are focused on the most effective ways of achieving their aspirations. This guidance is provided by right view, both on its mundane and on its transcendent levels. The mundane level of right view teaches the principle of karma, that we experience happiness and sorrow due to a combination of our past and present intentions. If we act with unskillful intentions, based on ill will, cruelty, resentment, or passion, either for ourselves or for others, we're going to suffer. If we act with skillful intentions, we'll experience happiness. The fact that happiness and sorrow are dependent on present and not just past intentions is what allows the brahmaviharas to be effective in the first place. If everything depended on our past actions, we, and all other beings, would simply be passive victims or beneficiaries of forces over which we had no present control. But because our present intentions play a crucial role in determining whether we are to experience mental pleasure or pain now and into the future, the attitudes that influence our present intentions in a skillful direction can have a real effect in leading to happiness. The extent to which we can encourage others to develop similar attitudes will have a real effect on their happiness as well. Even when people have done unskillful things in the past, the quality of present skillful intentions and attitudes can mitigate those effects dramatically. In this way, the teaching on karma not only explains why the brahmaviharas can be effective means to happiness, but also provides the reasons that motivate us to develop these attitudes. We need to strengthen them so that we can make our intentions more trustworthy. At the same time, the teaching on karma shows what it means to aim at genuine happiness. Because happiness has a cause, skillful action, your wish for happiness has to focus on the cause. Otherwise, it will have no effect. This lesson applies to the sublime attitudes both when directed to yourself and when directed to others. Goodwill for yourself means being determined to act skillfully. Goodwill for others means hoping that they will understand the causes for true happiness and act in line with that understanding. Compassion means compassion not only for people who are suffering, but also for people who are acting in ways that will create more suffering. Empathetic joy applies not only to people who are happy, but also to people who are acting in ways that will lead to true happiness. Equanimity applies not only to sufferings that are beyond one's control, but also to actions that one cannot prevent. All of this means that if you really want other people to be happy, you don't just treat them nicely. You also want them to learn how to create the causes for happiness. The best way to do this is to show them through the example of your own behavior. If possible, you can also encourage them to follow your example. At the very least, you don't thwart their attempts to act skillfully. This is how the brahmaviharas function in the context of mundane right view. Next, he discusses the transcendent level of right view, but I'm just going to skip over that. It's a bit technical, and if you're interested, we've got copies in the free distribution book there. So we go on to part 3, where he just discusses the 7 misunderstandings. When understood in context, the brahmaviharas are effective tools on the path to awakening. But unfortunately, now that the brahmaviharas have come to the West, they have often been taken out of context, giving rise to confusion about their nature and role. This may be because they deal with emotions that are common human property, so people feel that they intuitively understand them without needing to have their Buddhist context explained. Or it may be because the West has such a long tradition concerning the religious role of selfless love. Seeing that goodwill resembles selfless love, many people have assumed that the Buddha's teachings on this topic fit neatly in with what they have learned from Western religions. Whatever their cause, these assumptions have given rise to some misunderstandings around brahmavihara practice that are serious enough to get in the way of awakening. Most prominent among this sort of misunderstanding are these. 1. Metta, the first brahmavihara, means love or loving kindness. 2. The practice of the brahmaviharas is a form of prayer. 3. Metta is best expressed by acts of uncritical tenderness. 4. The brahmaviharas are part of the innate nature of the human heart. 5. Other people deserve our metta, either because of their own innate goodness or because we are all one. 6. The brahmaviharas are purely heart qualities, needing no input from the analytical mind. 7. The brahmaviharas are in themselves a complete path to awakening. Many of these misunderstandings arise from not viewing the brahmaviharas in the context of the Buddha's teachings on kama and fabrication. Because they are so widely entrenched, it's worthwhile going into detail as to why they are actually detrimental on the path, and how a proper understanding of kama and fabrication can help avoid that detriment. Delineating clearly what the brahmaviharas are not helps to clarify what they are. What follows is a discussion one by one of exactly how these misunderstandings deviate from the Buddha's original teachings on the brahmaviharas, and how they can be corrected by examining what those teachings actually have to say about the issues that these misunderstandings raise. This discussion is supplemented by the reading passages given in the second part of the book. These passages, drawn from the Pali Canon, the earliest extant record of the Buddha's teachings, have also been arranged in 7 sections corresponding to the 7 sections in the discussion, so that you can easily find the material on which the discussion is based and explore it further. The purpose of this presentation is to clear away any obstacles that might block the use for which the brahmaviharas were intended as part of a path to the happiness of total release. Misunderstanding number 1. Metta means love or loving kindness. The Pali word for love is not metta, it is pema. As the Buddha points out, pema is partial by nature. When you love people, you tend to love anyone who treats them well, and to hate anyone who mistreats them. And there are cases where you love anyone who mistreats the people you hate. For this reason, love is not a good basis for an attitude that is universally skillful toward all. Because metta is essentially an impartial wish for happiness, it's best translated as goodwill. When goodwill is developed in line with right view, it understands that beings will be happy only from understanding and acting on the causes of genuine happiness, rather than from winning special favor with you. In this way, when you extend thoughts of metta to others, you're not offering to make them happy as you might in a loving relationship. Instead, you're expressing the wish that they take responsibility for their happiness themselves. If there's anything you can do to help them in this direction, you're happy to provide help. But you realize that because they need to be willing to work for genuine happiness, you can only do so much. In this way, goodwill won't conflict with equanimity when you've reached the point beyond your ability to help. This understanding of metta is born out in the passages where the Buddha recommends phrases to hold in mind when developing thoughts of metta. These phrases provide the clearest guide not only to the emotional quality that underlies metta, but also to the understanding of happiness that explains why it's wise and realistic to develop metta for all. The first set of phrases comes in a passage where the Buddha recommends thoughts to counter ill will. These phrases conclude with the wish that all beings, quote, look after themselves with ease. In other words, you're not saying that you're going to be there for all beings at all time, and most beings would be happier knowing that they could depend on themselves rather than having to depend on you. If you really wish others well, it's best to wish them the happiness of independence and self-reliance. Another set of metta phrases in the famous Karaniya Metta Sutta includes a wish that all beings avoid the causes that would lead them to unhappiness. Let no one deceive another or despise anyone anywhere. or through anger or resistance, wish for another to suffer. In repeating these phrases, you remember that people will find true happiness only if they understand the causes for happiness and act on them. They also have to understand that true happiness is harmless. If it depends on something that harms others, it's not going to last. So again, when you express goodwill, you're not saying that you're going to be there for others all the time. Instead, you're hoping that all beings will wise up enough to be there for themselves. The same discourse goes on to say that when you are developing this attitude, you should protect it with all your vigilance and strength. As a mother would risk her life to protect her child, her only child, even so should one cultivate a limitless heart with regard to all beings. This passage has to be read carefully and in context. It's sometimes understood as saying that we should be willing to sacrifice our lives to protect all others, in the same way that a mother would sacrifice her life for the sake of her child. Putting aside the fact that such a requirement is simply impossible to carry out, there is nowhere in the canon where the Buddha states this as a moral responsibility. You can't stop all those who want to mistreat their fellow beings. The best you can do to protect others is to adhere in all cases to the precepts against doing harm, so that at the very least they will suffer no harm from you. Quote, "There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones, abandoning the taking of life, abstains from taking life. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. In giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression." And then similarly for the other 4 precepts. There are passages, however, where the Buddha says that you should protect your goodwill with your life, even when others are intent on killing you in a savage way. Quote, "Monks, even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a 2-handled saw, he among you who let his heart get angered, even at that, would not be doing my bidding. Even then you should train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected, and we will say no evil words. We will remain sympathetic with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. We will keep pervading these people with an awareness imbued with goodwill, and beginning with them, we will keep pervading the all-encompassing world with an awareness imbued with goodwill, abundant, expansive, limitless, free from hostility, free from ill will. That's how you should train yourselves." So in the Buddha's image of the mother protecting the child represents your goodwill, something you need to protect devotedly to make sure that your virtuous intentions don't waver, even in the most difficult situations. Harm can happen most easily when there's a lapse in your goodwill, so you do whatever you can to foster this attitude at all times. This is why, as the Buddha says toward the end of the Karaniya Metta Sutta, you should stay determined to practice this form of mindfulness, the mindfulness of keeping in mind your wish that all beings be happy, to make sure that it always informs the motivation for everything you do. Finally, there's a passage where the Buddha teaches the monks a chant for spreading goodwill to all snakes and other creeping things they encounter in the wilds. Strikingly, the chant concludes with the sentence, "May the beings depart." This wisely takes into consideration the truth that living together is often difficult, especially for beings of different species that can harm one another, and the happiest policy for all concerned is often to live harmlessly apart. These different ways of expressing metta show that metta does not equal loving kindness. Metta is better thought of as goodwill for 2 principal reasons. The first is that goodwill is an attitude you can express for everyone without fear of being hypocritical or unrealistic. It recognizes that people will become truly happy, not as a result of your caring for them, but as a result of their own skillful actions, and that the happiness of self-reliance is greater than any happiness coming from dependency. The second reason is that goodwill is a more skillful feeling to have toward those who would react unskillfully to your loving kindness. There are people who, when seeing that you want to express loving kindness, would be quick to take advantage of it. There are also people you've harmed in the past who would rather not have anything to do with you ever again. So the intimacy of loving kindness would actually be a source of pain for them rather than joy. And there are plenty of animals out there who would feel threatened by any overt expressions of love from a human being. In these cases, a more distant sense of goodwill, that you promise yourself never to harm those people or those beings, and that you wish them well, would be better for everyone involved. This doesn't mean that loving kindness is never an appropriate expression of goodwill. You simply have to know when it's appropriate and when it's not. If you truly feel metta for yourself and others, you can't let your desire for warm feelings of love and intimacy blind you to what would actually be the most skillful way to promote true happiness for all. Misunderstanding number 2. The practice of the brahmaviharas is a form of prayer. As the Buddha points out, if people could find happiness simply through the power of prayer, no one in the world would be short-lived, ugly, unhappy, or poor. Happiness has to come from taking actions that function as the cause of happiness. To perform these actions, you need to set your resolve on them because they take effort, and because the thoughts on which you resolve bend your mind in their direction. You have to train your resolves so that they lead consistently in a skillful direction. This is why the brahmaviharas are a practice, something you work on again and again. You try to make them unlimited so that even in difficult circumstances, you will keep in mind the need to act in ways that cause harm to no one, neither yourself nor others. For these reasons, the practice of the brahmaviharas is a matter not of prayer, but of resolve. Misunderstanding number 3. Metta is best expressed by acts of uncritical tenderness. The word metta is closely allied with the word mitta, or friend. It's the quality of heart that one genuine friend offers to another. There are many kinds of friendship, true and false, skillful and unskillful, and it's obvious that the quality of metta the Buddha recommends is that of a friendship skillful and true. The Pali Canon recognizes 2 types of worthwhile friends. The first is the loyal friend, one who is generous and steadfast, working for your benefit even when times are difficult, encouraging you when you're right, correcting you when you're wrong, and willing even to sacrifice his or her life for your sake. The second type of friend is the admirable friend, one whose behavior is exemplary in terms of conviction, virtue, generosity, discernment, and if possible, in the noble attainments, and who encourages you to emulate his or her good qualities in yourself. As the Buddha says, the loyal friend is to be treasured, the admirable friend is to be emulated. The loyal friend is obviously one who feels love, pema, for you, and so is partial toward you. For this reason, this sort of friend, even though worth treasuring, is not the best model for developing universal goodwill, because partiality stands in the way of a mind state that's truly universal. Still, it's worth noting that even the loyal friend doesn't adopt an uncritical attitude toward your behavior and doesn't encourage you to engage in activities such as killing, stealing, illicit sex, lying, and taking intoxicants that would go against the precepts of moral virtue. Because this sort of friend desires your true well-being, he or she can be critical and stern to prevent any moral lapses on your part. The same is true of the admirable friend, who is the ideal model for the development of universal goodwill. This sort of friend is even more scrupulous in wanting you to avoid evil actions and to develop the best and highest qualities of the heart and mind. This is the sort of friend you try to be to the whole world when you develop thoughts of unlimited goodwill. What this means in embodying the brahmaviharas is that not all acts of tenderness are in line with genuine goodwill. Not all critical thoughts and words are harmful. The canon makes the point in many ways. To begin with, it states very clearly that a spiritual teacher should not engage in physical intimacy with a student. This is an area where a great deal of damage has been done in schools, churches, and spiritual communities over the centuries. However, the Vinaya, the section of the canon containing the rules by which the monks should live, prohibits this form of behavior in no uncertain terms. A monk who has sexual intercourse with anyone at all is immediately expelled. If a monk even suggests that someone would benefit from having sex with an advanced spiritual practitioner, such as himself, he has to undergo a severe penance. From the Buddha's point of view, acts of goodwill and compassion must fall within the bounds of the precepts if they are to be genuinely friendly, and he offers no room for the idea that goodwill or compassion can ever be used as excuses for breaking the precepts. In fact, it's only through adhering strictly to the precepts that you are forced to confront subtle, unskillful attitudes within yourself that you otherwise might not have noticed or whose long-term harm you might not have seen. There may be short-term benefits that come from breaking the precepts, but they are outweighed by the long-term harm they cause. If you break a precept, you harm yourself in creating bad karma. You harm others in the impact of your actions on them and in setting them a bad example. And it's important to understand what the Buddha counts as harm. It may be necessary to sacrifice your comforts, and sometimes your health, and even your life, for things you hold in higher esteem, but that doesn't count as doing harm. That doesn't count as doing yourself harm. True harm is when you abandon the principles of right speech, right action, and right livelihood on the path. Because an understanding of right and wrong requires critical judgment, the Buddha indicates that there is a place for critical thoughts and words in an attitude of genuine friendship, because genuine friendship includes wanting what is right for your friend. Hurting your friend's feelings when aiming at his or her welfare does not count as harm. The image the Buddha gives is of a child who has placed a sharp object in its mouth. You have to get the object out, even if it means drawing blood, for if you let the child swallow the object, it will cause itself even greater harm. In the same way, the Buddha would speak harsh words when and where he saw that they needed to be harsh to have a beneficial effect. His general principle on right speech is that he would speak words that are true and beneficial. Note that he does not entertain the idea that false words could be beneficial. Knowing when to state those words in pleasing ways and when to state them in unpleasant ways. In other words, there are cases where pleasant words are not wise expressions of goodwill or sympathy. In all cases, his motive is compassionate, the welfare of those who are listening. And as he notes in his discussions of worthwhile friends, this is a quality not only of an admirable friend, but also of a loyal one. It's an expression both of love and of goodwill. All of this means that metta is best expressed in your own external behavior by words and deeds that set an upright example to others, and by encouraging others, harshly or gently, as the case may require, to be upright in their behavior as well. Misunderstanding number 4. The brahmaviharas are part of the innate nature of the human heart. The Buddha never attributed an innate nature of any kind to the heart, good or bad. In fact, in Anguttara Nikaya 4.199, he identified thoughts, I am good and I am bad, among the craving verbalizations that ensnare the mind. If you assume that the heart is basically bad, you won't feel capable of following the path and will tend to look for outside help to do the work for you. If you assume that the heart is basically good, you'll feel capable but will easily get complacent. You won't exert the scrupulous effort needed to develop the brahmaviharas at all times. So even though the Buddha's primary focus was on the citta, which can be translated as both heart and mind, he nowhere defined what the citta is. As he said in Samyutta Nikaya 22:36, if you define yourself, you limit yourself. So instead he focused his assumptions on what the mind can do. To begin with, the mind can change quickly. Normally, a master of the apt simile, even the Buddha, had to admit that he could find no adequate analogy for how quickly the mind can change. We might say that it can change in the flash of an eye, but it's actually faster than that. And it's capable of all sorts of things, neither inherently good nor inherently bad. It can do a huge variety of good and bad actions. In the Buddha's words, the mind is more variegated than the animal kingdom. Think of how many species of fish in the sea, birds in the sky, animals on the land and under the ground, whether extant or extinct, all of these species are products of minds, the acts of mind that cause those beings to be born in those bodies. And the mind can take on a wider variety of forms than even that. This variety comes from the many different choices the mind makes under the influence of ignorance and defilement. But the mind doesn't always have to be defiled. Past karma is not entirely deterministic. Even though past karma shapes the range of options open to the mind in the present, it doesn't have to determine present karma, the intentions by which the mind chooses to fabricate actual experiences from among those options. Thus, present karma can choose to continue creating the conditions for more ignorance or not, because present choices are what keep ignorance alive. Although no one, not even a Buddha, can trace back to when the defilement of ignorance first began, the continued existence of ignorance depends on conditions continually provided by unskillful karma. If these conditions are removed, ignorance will disband. This is why the Buddha said that the mind is luminous, stained with defilements that come and go. Taken out of context, this statement might be misconstrued as implying that the mind is inherently good, kind, or awakened. But in context, the Buddha is simply saying that the mind, once stained, is not permanently stained. When the conditions for the stains are gone, the mind becomes luminous again. But this luminosity is not an awakened nature. As the Buddha states, this luminous mind can be developed. In the scheme of the Four Noble Truths, if something is to be developed, it's not the goal. It's part of the path to the goal. After this luminosity has been developed in the advanced stages of concentration, it can be used to help pierce through ignorance, and then, with all the factors of the path, it is put aside so as to allow the goal to be fully experienced. What this means is that the brahmaviharas are not innate in the heart or mind, but then neither are the opposites. The heart is capable of either, and which attitude you fabricate is a matter of choice. This is why the Buddha spent so much time explaining how and why the brahmaviharas should be fabricated and developed to an unlimited level. If these attitudes were innate to the heart, there would be no need for a how or a why. The brahmaviharas would simply be there, and he would have told you to let them unfold on their own. But because the heart can just as simply go in the other direction, the Buddha did the responsible thing in warning of the dangers of the untrained heart, and did such a thorough job of displaying the benefits of and explaining the means for getting it trained. In fact, it's just as well that the brahmaviharas are not innate to the heart, for if they were, they would get in the way of total release. You need to stay in a universe where there would be objects for your goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. You would never reach the freedom of a dimension where awareness has no need for objects at all. Maybe I'll leave it there. And if anyone has any questions, Aja and Jeff takes phone calls between 7 and 7:30 a.m. at Wat Metta every morning. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you.
Hello, how are Right. Oh, I love that story. It was really good. I like that from Ajahn Jeff. It seems like what I understand, and I had a question, but you answered the question as you continued reading, and I don't know if I got it right. But it reminds me of a story or a talk that Ram Dass was given to nurses and doctors about the head and the heart, and just how to take care of patients. And there was I think he was telling a story of a woman from a previous talk. She said that there was a homeless person on the corner, and she would give him money like every day, just a little bit. But she would never start a conversation with him or make have more contact with the homeless person. The reason was because she's afraid that he would end up in her living room on the couch, right? So listening to the heart too much. But then the head is protecting you from who knows, the homeless person could be an addict or would not leave her house. You never know, those are things that go through our head. But the heart definitely wants to help. And so, what is the right choice, even if you have a family member or a friend that has financial needs or an addict or, so many different problems that you could possibly get entangled with their dukkha, and that would kind of hinder your practice. So it's how do you find that equanimity by helping and still wanting to protect yourself, but not overprotect yourself by not helping them? You know what I mean? I know I'm going back and forth here, but how do you do that?
I think the Wat Metta number's on the website, and you can just 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. That's a good question. I mean, I think you have to take it sort of one case at a time. You can't sort of apply some universal solution to these sorts of things. And I think that's why I like the connection with right view, that you have to apply wisdom also in relationship to these brahmaviharas and knowing sort of what's appropriate. And then also what he spoke about in regards to equanimity. You use wisdom to sort of guide how you can apply metta, karuna to these situations, and you do what you can. But then when there's times where you can't help in a real way, then that's when you have to apply equanimity. And there's a lot of circumstances where there's nothing we can do. So that's quite a helpful brahmavihara to cultivate. So it kind of takes discernment, I guess, in that situation to kind of recognize whether someone can accept the help, and if you're sort of veering off track and losing your balance. And kind of Ajahn Jeff, I think, was saying there that the best way we can help people, one, is by living an upright life ourselves. And if we can do that and not harm other people, then maybe we can encourage other people to we can help guide other people towards cultivating the skills and attitudes that lead to true happiness. But we have to sort of develop ourselves first before we can really do that. And at the minimum, don't do harm or don't discourage people from cultivating those skillful qualities. But we can't help so much if we're sort of blinded by greed and delusion. We'll probably just end up doing more harm.
Right.
So, and it's case by case sort of circumstance, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of what I got from his teachings. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for your insight.